The town laughed when a homeless Navy SEAL bought a cursed mountain house, until his dog uncovered a secret worth everything. They mocked a homeless Navy SEAL's mountain house. His dog found what they hid below. Ethan Cross had lost almost everything: his wife, his home, and the future he thought he had left. With only his retired German Shepherd, Shadow, beside him, he spent his last dollars on a crumbling mountain house everyone else feared. But when Shadow began digging beneath the stone foundation, they uncovered a hidden secret buried deep inside the Rockies. One powerful man had spent decades trying to find. Comment 1 if you would follow your dog's instincts, or 0 if you would walk away, and tell us where you're watching from today. The October wind swept across the Colorado high country like a cold warning from the mountains. Ethan Cross sat behind the wheel of an aging Ford pickup parked at the edge of a gravel lot outside the Jefferson County Administration Building. The truck had more than 300,000 miles on it. Rust scarred the wheel wells. The driver's seat was torn. The heater worked only when it felt like it. For the last 8 months, it had also been Ethan's home. A gray sleeping bag lay folded behind the seat. A plastic cooler sat on the floorboard. A stack of unpaid medical bills rested inside the glove compartment. The life he had spent 40 years building had disappeared piece by piece. First came the cancer. Then came the hospital stays. Then came the funeral. After his wife Emily died, everything else followed. The savings vanished. The house was sold. The debt remained. At 61 years old, after surviving combat deployments that had nearly killed him more than once, Ethan Cross found himself sleeping in parking lots and truck stops. The only thing he still had was sitting beside him: Shadow. The German Shepherd's dark eyes watched the world through the passenger window. The retired military K9 was nearly 10 years old now. Gray fur had begun appearing around his muzzle, but his posture still carried the quiet confidence of a working dog. Ethan reached over and scratched behind his ears. "You ready for another bad decision, partner?" Shadow's tail thumped once against the seat. The dog always did that. Not excited, not worried, just present. As if no matter how bad things became, he had already decided they would face them together. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." Outside, people were filing into the county building. The tax auction would begin in 15 minutes. Normally, Ethan wouldn't have bothered, but 3 weeks earlier, he had seen a listing buried near the bottom of an online foreclosure notice. One property, remote mountain location, structure condition unknown, access road limited, no utility guarantees, minimum bid $4,800. The listing contained only one blurry photograph. Most people would have ignored it, but Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe because he had nowhere else to go. Maybe because something about the lonely house standing against a mountainside reminded him of himself. Forgotten, abandoned, still standing, he stepped out of the truck. Shadow jumped down beside him. The morning air smelled of pine and distant snow. Winter was coming. Ethan pulled his worn jacket tighter around himself and headed toward the building. Inside, the auction room buzzed with conversation. Developers, investors, real estate agents, people who looked comfortable, successful. The kind of people who never worried where they would sleep. Ethan found a chair near the back wall. Shadow settled beside him. Several people glanced at the dog, then at Ethan, then looked away. A few minutes later, the auction began. Property after property sold. Vacant lots, storage buildings, commercial spaces. The numbers climbed quickly. Then the auctioneer reached the final section. Remote properties. The room visibly lost interest. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses. Property number 47. Mountain parcel outside Silver Ridge. 1 residence. Condition uncertain. A photograph appeared on the screen. The house looked even worse than Ethan remembered. Half buried against a rocky slope. Sagging roof, broken porch, dark windows. It looked less like a home and more like something the mountain had decided not to finish swallowing. A few chuckles moved through the room. Someone near the front laughed. "That dump again?" Another man shook his head. "Nobody wants that place," the auctioneer continued. Opening bid, $4,800. Silence. Nobody raised a paddle. The auctioneer waited. Nothing. Ethan glanced down at Shadow. The dog was staring at the screen. Completely focused. Strange. Then Ethan lifted his bidder card. The auctioneer nodded. I have 4,800. Several heads turned. A woman near the front laughed openly. Seriously? The man beside her smirked. Guess somebody likes haunted houses. More laughter followed. Ethan ignored them. The auctioneer looked around. Any other bids? Nothing. Not one person moved. The room seemed almost eager to let Ethan have it. The gavel struck. Sold. The sound echoed across the room. Just like that, Ethan Cross owned a mountain house. The applause that followed wasn't congratulatory. It was amused. A few people actually shook their heads. One older rancher standing near the exit gave Ethan a long look, then he walked over. The man's face was weathered by decades of mountain winters. He studied Ethan carefully. Then he glanced toward the photograph still displayed on the screen. You bought the old Silver Ridge place, Ethan nodded. Looks that way. The rancher exhaled slowly. People have been avoiding that mountain for 30 years. Why? The man stared toward the image. For a moment it seemed he might answer. Instead he shook his head. Doesn't matter. Then he started walking away. Halfway to the door he stopped. Without turning around he said quietly, Whatever you do, pay attention to your dog. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? But the rancher kept walking. He never answered. Outside, the sky had darkened. Clouds gathered over the Rockies. By noon, Ethan was driving west towards Silver Ridge. The road wound through endless forests and towering peaks. Golden aspens covered entire mountainsides. Snow glowed on distant summits. The scenery should have been beautiful. But Ethan's mind kept drifting. The mountains, the silence, the isolation. Places like this sometimes triggered memories, old memories, dangerous memories. A sudden crack of thunder in the distance made his hands tighten on the steering wheel. For one terrible second, the sound became something else. An explosion, a flash, a battlefield. The smell of smoke. His breathing quickened. The familiar pressure began building inside his chest. Then Shadow moved. The dog placed one paw gently on Ethan's leg. Nothing more. Just contact, grounding, present, real. Ethan inhaled slowly, then again. The memory loosened its grip. Good boy. Shadow settled back down. The moment passed. Hours later, the highway gave way to mountain roads, then gravel, then dirt. Civilization slowly disappeared behind them. As sunset approached, Ethan rounded a bend and saw it, the house. It stood alone on a ridge overlooking a forgotten valley. Dark pine forests surrounded it. Steep cliffs rose behind it. The structure looked even older than the photograph. Half of the building seemed built into the mountain itself. Weathered boards creaked in the wind. Broken windows reflected the dying sunlight. No neighboring homes, no power lines. No signs of life. Just silence, a lot of silence. Ethan stopped the truck. For several moments, neither he nor Shadow moved. The mountain watched them, waiting. Then Shadow stood. His ears rose. His eyes locked onto the house. Not the porch, not the roof. Something deeper, something hidden. The dog stared so intensely that Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. What is it, partner? Shadow didn't look away. The wind howled across the ridge. Far below, the valley disappeared into gathering darkness. And for the first time since buying the property, Ethan felt something he couldn't explain. The strange sensation that the house had been waiting for them. Not just the house, the mountain itself. Waiting, watching, keeping a secret, and whatever that secret was, Shadow had already noticed it. Long before Ethan did. The last light of day faded behind the Colorado Rockies as Ethan sat inside the idling pickup truck, staring at the house he now owned. The mountain house seemed almost unreal in the growing darkness. It wasn't simply old, it felt forgotten. The weathered structure clung to the mountainside, as if it had been abandoned by both time and memory. One side disappeared directly into solid stone. The other overlooked the valley below, where long shadows stretched across fields and forests like dark rivers. Shadow remained focused on the house. His ears were forward. His body was perfectly still. That alone made Ethan uneasy. During their years together, he had learned to trust the dog's instincts more than his own. "Let's go see what we bought," Ethan finally said. Shadow immediately jumped from the truck. The gravel crunched beneath Ethan's boots as he approached the front porch. The wood groaned beneath his weight. The front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. A rusted lock dangled uselessly from the handle. Nobody had lived here in a very long time. Ethan pushed the door open. The smell hit him first: dust, old wood, cold stone. The scent of a place sealed away from the world. The beam from his flashlight swept across the interior. A table, a stone fireplace, 2 broken chairs, shelves coated in decades of dust. The house wasn't empty. It was frozen, as though someone had stood up one day and never returned. The silence inside felt heavier than the silence outside. Shadow entered cautiously. His nails clicked softly against the floorboards. He moved from room to room, inspecting every corner. Ethan followed. The first floor was simple: a kitchen, a small living room, 2 bedrooms, everything worn, everything neglected, yet strangely intact. No signs of vandalism, no signs of looting, no evidence that anyone had tried to salvage what remained. That struck Ethan as odd. Most abandoned properties were stripped bare within years. This one looked untouched. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. A sudden bang echoed from somewhere in the house. Ethan froze. His pulse instantly surged. For half a second, he wasn't in Colorado anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere hot, somewhere dangerous. The sound transformed in his mind. A door slam became a blast. The shadows became smoke. The room began shrinking around him. His breathing quickened. His chest tightened. Then Shadow appeared beside him. The dog pressed firmly against his leg. Solid, real, present. Ethan closed his eyes. One breath, then another. The panic slowly loosened its grip. When he opened his eyes again, the mountain house has returned. No battlefield. No explosions. Just wind. "Thanks, partner." Shadow's tail moved once. The moment passed. Later, Ethan unpacked the few belongings he still owned. The sleeping bag, a duffel bag, a photograph of Emily, a framed military commendation he never displayed. He placed the photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. For several moments he stared at it. Emily's smile seemed unchanged by time, kind, patient, warm, the exact opposite of the cold emptiness surrounding him now. "I finally bought another house," he said quietly. The words sounded ridiculous. A homeless man standing inside a collapsing mountain cabin. Yet somehow he felt she would have laughed and told him it was a start. Outside, darkness settled fully across the valley. The temperature dropped rapidly. Ethan gathered fallen branches and managed to get a fire going inside the old stone fireplace. Orange light flickered across the walls. For the first time all day, the house felt slightly alive. Shadow curled up near the flames. Ethan sat in one of the surviving chairs. The crackling fire filled the silence. The loneliness remained. But it felt different now. Less like an enemy, more like something he could survive. Hours passed. The mountain outside disappeared beneath moonlight. Ethan eventually spread his sleeping bag near the fireplace. His body ached from years of hard living. Exhaustion settled over him. He drifted into sleep. Then came the dream, the same dream. The one that always found him. Gunfire, dust, chaos, a teammate screaming, a radio crackling, blood, the smell of burning metal. Ethan jerked awake. His heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat covered his face, despite the cold. The fire had nearly burned out. The room sat in darkness. For several seconds he struggled to remember where he was. Then he heard it. A low growl. Shadow. The dog wasn't beside the fireplace anymore. He was standing across the room, facing a closed door. The basement door. Shadow's body was rigid, his eyes locked on the darkness beyond it. A low rumble vibrated deep in his chest. Not fear, warning. Ethan sat up. "What is it?" The dog didn't move. The growl continued. Ethan grabbed the flashlight. The beam illuminated the old wooden door. Nothing seemed unusual. No movement, no sound. Yet Shadow refused to look away. Finally, Ethan stood and approached. The closer he got, the colder the air seemed to become. He grasped the handle. The door creaked open. Stone steps descended into darkness. The basement. The flashlight revealed old shelves, broken crates, dust. Nothing more. No monsters down there, Ethan muttered. Shadow remained unconvinced. The German Shepherd stared into the darkness for several more seconds before reluctantly stepping back. Eventually, Ethan returned to his sleeping bag. But he noticed something strange. Shadow did not lie down beside the fireplace. Instead, the dog positioned himself directly in front of the basement door, watching, guarding, waiting. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky. Sunlight filtered through the dusty windows. Ethan stepped onto the porch, carrying a cup of coffee heated over the fire. The valley stretched below him, beautiful, silent, miles of forests, open fields, snow-capped peaks rising beyond the horizon. For the first time in months, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Tiny, fragile, but real. Maybe this place wasn't much. Maybe the house was falling apart. Maybe everyone else thought he was crazy. But it was his. No landlord. No parking lot. No borrowed couch. Just a mountain house and a loyal dog. A beginning. Then he looked down. Shadow stood beside the porch, not looking at the valley, not looking at the mountains, looking back at the house, specifically at the section where the structure disappeared into solid rock. The dog remained completely focused, as if he could hear something hidden beneath the mountain, something waiting in the darkness below. And for the first time, Ethan began wondering if the old rancher at the auction had been right. Maybe he really should pay attention to his dog. The next few days settled into a quiet rhythm. Every morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. He fed Shadow, started a fire, walked the property, then spent the day repairing whatever part of the mountain house looked closest to collapse. The work was exhausting, but it felt good. For the first time since Emily's death, he had a purpose. A simple one. Keep moving, keep fixing, keep breathing. The mountain seemed determined to make that difficult. Cold winds swept down from the peaks every afternoon. The nights dropped below freezing. Several windows had to be boarded over before the first snow arrived. Still, Ethan kept working, and Shadow kept watching. Not the valley, not the forest, the house, specifically the basement. By the fourth day, Ethan could no longer ignore it. Every time he entered the basement, Shadow followed. Every time he left, Shadow lingered behind. The dog would stand motionless near the far wall, staring, listening, waiting. It made no sense. The basement itself was unremarkable. Stone walls, dust, old shelves, rotting crates. Nothing else, at least. Nothing Ethan could see. Yet Shadow's behavior grew stranger. At night, he refused to sleep near the fireplace. Instead, he curled up directly beside the basement door, guarding it. The first few times, Ethan laughed it off. The 10th time wasn't funny anymore. One evening, while organizing supplies, Ethan noticed Shadow sitting motionless again. The dog hadn't moved in nearly 20 minutes. His eyes remained locked on the same section of wall. Ethan walked over. "What are you looking at?" Shadow glanced at him briefly, then looked back. The wall, again. Ethan shined his flashlight across the stone surface. Nothing. No holes, no cracks, no movement, no sounds. Just old stone. Yet Shadow's ears remained forward, focused, alert. The same posture he'd used during deployments whenever something dangerous is hid beyond their view. A memory surfaced. Afghanistan. Years earlier, a narrow dirt road, Shadow suddenly stopping, refusing to move, staring toward a pile of rocks. The rest of the team had nearly ignored him, until they discovered its explosives hidden beneath the road. The dog had saved lives that day, including Ethan's. The memory sent a chill through him. Shadow wasn't random, never had been. When the dog fixated on something, there was usually a reason. The question was what? That night, a storm rolled across the mountains. Thunder echoed through the valley. Rain lashed the roof. Wind rattled every loose board on the property. Ethan sat beside the fireplace, reading an old repair manual he'd found inside a cabinet. Shadow wasn't resting. The dog stood near the basement door again, watching, waiting. The storm intensified. Lightning flashed across the windows. Thunder shook the house. For a brief moment, Ethan thought he heard another sound beneath it. A faint vibration, almost like metal groaning somewhere deep underground. He looked up. The sound disappeared. Only the storm remained. Hours later, after midnight, another loud crack echoed through the house. Ethan jerked awake. His pulse instantly accelerated. For one terrifying second, he thought the roof had collapsed. Shadow exploded into motion. The dog barked sharply. Not fear, alarm. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and rushed toward the basement. The moment he opened the door, cold air rushed upward. The smell of wet earth filled the stairwell. Shadow bolted down the steps. Easy. The dog ignored him. Ethan followed. The flashlight beam danced across the darkness, then stopped. A section of the basement wall had partially collapsed. Large stones littered the floor. Dust still hung in the air. Rainwater trickled through the rubble. Ethan stared. The collapse had opened a gap roughly 3 feet wide. Nothing unusual, just old damage. At least that's what he thought. Then Shadow began digging. The German Shepherd attacked the pile of rubble with surprising intensity. His paws scattered dirt and broken stones. Ethan frowned. "What are you doing?" Shadow kept digging, again and again. The dog was completely focused. Something beneath the debris had his full attention. Minutes passed, then Shadow stopped. He barked once. Ethan moved closer. The flashlight beam swept across the exposed section of wall. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. The stone surface looked different, smoother, straighter, artificial. He knelt beside it. His fingers brushed away dirt, metal, cold metal, hidden behind the collapsed rocks. His heartbeat quickened. He cleared away more debris. Slowly an outline emerged, a rectangular shape, large, solid, deliberately concealed. Ethan froze. This wasn't part of the foundation. This was something else, something hidden, something built. The storm roared outside. Thunder shook the mountain, yet Ethan barely heard it. His entire focus narrowed to the strange object emerging from the rubble. Shadow sat beside him, watching, almost patiently, as if he'd been trying to show Ethan this all along. Ethan grabbed an old shovel. For the next hour he worked alongside the dog, stone after stone. Dirt after dirt, the shape became clearer. A steel surface, rust-covered but intact, far larger than he first realized. Eventually, the entire thing stood exposed. A hatch, not a door. A hatch, embedded directly into the bedrock itself. The discovery sent a chill through him, because nobody builds something like this by accident. And nobody hides something like this without a reason. Rain hammered the roof overhead. The flashlight beam revealed strange markings across the metal. Most had faded. Some were barely visible. Ethan wiped away decades of grime. Letters slowly appeared. He read them twice. Then a third time. His pulse quickened. Property of... The rest was nearly unreadable. But one word remained clear. Authority. Below the letters sat an unfamiliar symbol, a circular emblem. Inside it was a mountain, a river, and a star. Ethan had never seen it before. The symbol didn't belong to any military branch he recognized, nor any government agency he knew, which somehow made the discovery even stranger. Shadow sniffed around the hatch, then looked at Ethan. The dog seemed almost satisfied, like a mystery had finally been uncovered. Outside, lightning illuminated the basement windows. For a split second, the room flashed bright white. The steel hatch reflected the light. Then darkness returned. Ethan stared at it. 100 questions flooded his mind. Who built it? Why hide it? What was beneath it? And perhaps most unsettling of all, who had gone to such extraordinary lengths to make sure nobody found it? The storm continued raging through the night, but Ethan never went back upstairs. He remained in the basement beside the hatch, studying every detail, running his fingers across the cold steel, searching for clues. Shadow never left his side. Hours later, just before dawn, Ethan noticed something else. Near the bottom edge of the hatch, partially hidden beneath rust, a handle, and beside it, what looked very much like an old keyhole. The mountain house suddenly felt different, not abandoned, not forgotten, protected, as if whatever lay beneath it had been hidden intentionally, waiting for decades, perhaps longer. And now, because one stubborn German shepherd refused to sleep, the secret was beginning to surface. Neither Ethan nor Shadow knew it yet, but the moment that wall collapsed, everything about Ethan's life had started to change. Dawn arrived hidden behind thick storm clouds. The mountain seemed wrapped in gray silence. Rainwater dripped steadily from the roof, while cold fog drifted through the pine trees surrounding the house. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat in the basement beside the steel hatch, studying it beneath the glow of a lantern. Shadow rested nearby, not sleeping, watching. The same way he had watched the wall for days, almost as if his job wasn't finished yet. Ethan rubbed a hand across his tired face. The hatch looked ancient. Its surface was scarred by rust and age, but the steel remained remarkably solid. Whoever built it had expected it to last, and it had. The strange emblem continued bothering him. Mountain, river, star. It felt official, yet unfamiliar. Military training had taught Ethan to recognize symbols quickly. This one belonged nowhere he could remember. He brushed away more dirt. Beneath layers of grime, additional letters appeared. Most remained unreadable, but one word emerged clearly. Conservation. Ethan frowned. Conservation Authority. The phrase meant nothing to him. Shadow stood and approached. The dog sniffed the hatch once more before looking directly at Ethan. The message was obvious. Open it. I would if I could. Ethan examined the keyhole again. Old, unusual, far larger than a normal lock. Whatever key belonged here wasn't something he could pick up at a hardware store. The realization frustrated him. After discovering a secret hidden beneath the mountain, he was stopped by a lock. Still, he refused to force it. Something about the hatch felt important. Damaging it seemed reckless. By noon, the rain had finally eased. Ethan decided he needed information. And information meant people. The nearest town sat 15 miles away, Silver Ridge, or what remained of it. The road descending from the mountain wound through forests and rocky cliffs, before eventually opening into a small valley. The town looked like many former mining communities scattered throughout the Rockies. A handful of businesses, old brick buildings, weathered storefronts, more history than money. Ethan parked near the main street. Shadow immediately drew attention. Several locals nodded respectfully toward the German Shepherd. One elderly man even stopped to admire him. Beautiful dog, Ethan smiled. He knows it, the old man chuckled. Looks smarter than most people around here. That's not a high bar. The man laughed and continued walking. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, Ethan felt something unusual. Community, tiny, distant, but present. His stomach growled. He followed the smell of fresh coffee toward a diner sitting near the center of town. A faded sign above the entrance read, Boone's Diner. The interior looked frozen somewhere around 1978. Wood paneling, old photographs, vinyl booths, a long counter polished by decades of use. The smell of bacon filled the air. A few ranchers occupied the corner tables. Everyone noticed Shadow. Nobody seemed bothered by him. In fact, several smiled. A woman in her 70s stood behind the counter. Silver hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that suggested she'd seen everything. She glanced at Ethan, then Shadow, then the mud covering both of them. You mountain people? Ethan laughed softly. I guess so. She pointed toward a booth. Sit down before you freeze. Minutes later, coffee arrived. The woman introduced herself as Martha Boone, owner, cook, waitress, apparently all three. Ethan quickly learned that Martha knew everyone and everything. The conversation remained casual at first. Weather, road conditions, tourists. Then Martha asked the question, so where exactly are you staying? Ethan took a sip of coffee. The old house above the valley. Martha stopped wiping the counter. Which old house? The one near the ridge. Silence. The reaction was immediate. Two ranchers looked up. One exchanged a glance with the other. Martha slowly set down the rag. The stone house? Ethan nodded. The diner grew noticeably quieter. Not hostile, just surprised. Bought it last week. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Martha exhaled. Well, that's encouraging. A small smile crossed her face. Depends how you look at it. One of the ranchers approached. A broad-shouldered man in his 50s. Weathered face, friendly eyes. You actually bought that place? Ethan nodded. The rancher shook his head. Most folks won't even drive past it after dark. Why? The man looked toward Martha. Martha looked back. Neither seemed eager to answer. Finally, the rancher shrugged. Stories. What kind of stories? Depends who you ask. The rancher sat across from him. My grandfather used to say people were always looking for something up there. Ethan frowned. Looking for what? The rancher laughed. If anybody knew that, they would have found it. Martha finally spoke. All I know is strangers have been asking questions about that mountain for years. Questions? She nodded. Developers, researchers, survey teams, government people. Ethan sat forward. What kind of government people? Martha shrugged. Different ones. Never stayed long. The information sent a chill through him, because suddenly the hidden hatch felt less isolated. Maybe somebody knew about it. Maybe lots of people knew. Just not enough to find it. Shadow suddenly lifted his head, his ears rose. The dog stared toward the front window. Ethan followed his gaze. A black SUV rolled slowly past the diner. The vehicle didn't stop, didn't park. Yet something felt odd about it. The tinted windows, the slow speed, the way it seemed to be observing the town. Then it disappeared around the corner. Shadow continued watching. Martha noticed. What's wrong with him? I don't know. But Ethan wasn't entirely convinced. The dog rarely focused on vehicles. Not unless something about them mattered. The conversation shifted again. Eventually Martha leaned closer. Listen. Her voice lowered. If you really bought that house, she hesitated. Be careful. The words landed heavier than Ethan expected. Because of ghost stories? No. The smile vanished from her face. Because some people get very interested whenever somebody moves up there. Before Ethan could ask more questions, the diner door opened. Cold air swept inside. Every conversation stopped. A tall man entered. Expensive jacket, polished boots, confident smile. The kind of confidence money creates. Several locals immediately looked away. Others straightened. The atmosphere changed instantly. Martha's expression hardened. The man noticed and smiled wider. He walked toward the counter. For a moment his eyes landed on Ethan, then on Shadow. The look lasted only seconds. Yet Ethan felt it. Assessment, calculation, recognition. The stranger nodded politely, then ordered coffee. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Yet the entire diner seemed relieved when he finally left. Ethan watched through the window as the man climbed into another black SUV and drove away. Who was that? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Martha spoke. Warren Hale. The name meant nothing to Ethan. Should it? The rancher beside him sighed. Depends. On what? The rancher stared through the window. On how much land you own. The answer lingered in Ethan's thoughts during the drive back up the mountain. The hidden hatch, the strange stories, the people searching, the warning from Martha, and now Warren Hale. By the time the house appeared through the trees, the sun was sinking toward the western peaks. Long shadows stretched across the valley. The mountain looked darker than before, older somehow, waiting. Ethan parked the truck. Shadow jumped out immediately. Instead of heading toward the porch, the dog trotted directly toward the house, toward the basement, toward the hidden hatch. As if something beneath the mountain had been waiting all day for their return. And, for the first time, Ethan found himself wondering whether the hatch was only the beginning, because the deeper mystery wasn't what had been hidden. The deeper mystery was why so many people seemed determined to keep it hidden. The mountain seemed unusually quiet that evening. No wind, no rain, no distant thunder, just stillness. The kind of silence that made every sound feel important. Ethan stood in the basement staring at the steel hatch. A lantern cast long shadows across the stone walls. Shadow sat beside him, focused on the hatch exactly as he had been for days. The dog had found the secret. Now they needed to open it. Ethan knelt beside the rusted keyhole once again. He ran his fingers across the cold metal. The lock was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Large, industrial, built for security, not for convenience. His flashlight beam swept across the lower edge of the hatch. Then he stopped. Something caught his eye. A narrow groove hidden beneath years of rust. He leaned closer. The groove wasn't damage, it was a compartment. His pulse quickened. Using a screwdriver, he carefully pried at the edge. At first, nothing happened. Then a small metal panel snapped loose. Behind it sat a cylindrical object wrapped in oilcloth. Ethan froze. Slowly, he pulled it free. The cloth crumbled with age. Inside was a key, a very large key, heavy brass, darkened by decades underground. For a long moment, he simply stared. The key had been hidden inside the hatch itself, as if whoever built this place expected the right person to eventually find it. Shadow stood immediately, tail still, ears forward, ready. "You've got to be kidding me." Ethan looked from the key to the lock. The fit seemed obvious, almost too obvious. Yet his hand hesitated. Something about the moment felt larger than opening a door, like crossing a boundary, a line between two lives, the life he'd known, and whatever waited beyond the hatch. Finally, he inserted the key. The mechanism resisted, then turned. A deep metallic clunk echoed through the stone. The sound seemed impossibly loud, ancient, heavy, final. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Shadow immediately moved closer. The hatch remained shut, but the lock had released. Ethan gripped the handle, pulled, nothing. The steel hadn't moved in decades, maybe longer. He braced his boots against the floor and pulled harder. The hatch groaned, metal scraped against stone. Then slowly, inch by inch, it opened. Cold air rushed upward. Not stale air, cold air, fresh air, moving air, as if something below still breathed. The smell surprised him. Stone, water, metal, the scent of a hidden world. Ethan shined his flashlight into the opening. Darkness swallowed the beam. Then the light revealed stairs, concrete stairs, descending into the mountain. His heart pounded. Shadow stepped forward immediately. Without hesitation, without fear, the dog started down. Shadow. The German shepherd paused and looked back, waiting. Ethan laughed nervously. "Yeah, I know." He grabbed another flashlight, checked the batteries, and followed. The stairs descended farther than expected. 20 steps. 40. The air grew cooler with every level. Eventually, the staircase ended. A tunnel stretched ahead. The walls weren't natural stone. They had been cut, engineered, built. The floor was smooth concrete. Ethan swept his flashlight across the passage. Pipes. Large steel pipes. Running along both walls, some nearly 3 feet wide, others smaller, all disappearing into darkness. "What is this place?" His voice echoed through the tunnel. Shadow moved ahead, nose working, tail low, professional. The same way he used to search compounds overseas. The tunnel continued for nearly 100 yards, then widened. Ethan stepped through the opening and froze. The beam from his flashlight swept across something enormous. His breath caught. The chamber stretched far beyond the reach of the light. Massive steel structures rose from the floor. Platforms, ladders, walkways, pipes, reservoir tanks, machines. An underground facility hidden inside the mountain. His flashlight seemed tiny against the scale of it. "What?" The word died in his throat. Shadow walked forward, completely calm. The German shepherd seemed more curious than surprised. Ethan slowly followed. The room looked abandoned, yet strangely preserved. Dust covered everything, but nothing appeared damaged, nothing vandalized, nothing collapsed. It felt less like a ruin and more like a sleeping giant. The beam passed across a row of enormous tanks, each connected to networks of pipes disappearing deeper into the mountain. A control panel stood nearby, its switches and gauges frozen in time. Ethan approached. He brushed dust from a metal plate. Letters emerged. Water regulation system. His stomach tightened. Water. The word immediately connected to the stories he'd heard. The ranchers, the valley, the warnings. Shadow suddenly barked. Not alarm, discovery. The dog trotted toward the far side of the chamber. Ethan followed. Near the back wall stood something unexpected. A desk. An ordinary wooden desk. It looked absurd sitting in the middle of such an enormous underground complex. A lamp rested on top. Beside it sat several leather-bound journals. Dust coated everything, but the journals remained intact. Ethan carefully picked one up. The cover cracked softly. The first page contained neat handwriting. January 14, 1962. He flipped further. Entry after entry, maintenance reports, flow levels, inspections, records. Someone had worked here for years, maybe decades. Then he found a name, the Keeper. Not an individual name, a title. The Keeper is responsible for ensuring fair distribution throughout the valley. Ethan frowned. He continued reading. The facility controls access to the mountain aquifer. All regional reservoirs originate here. Control access must remain protected. His pulse quickened. Aquifer. Water source. The pieces slowly began fitting together. This wasn't a mine. It wasn't military. It wasn't government. At least not exactly. It was something far more important. The heart of the valley itself. A hidden system controlling water distribution across the entire region. Shadow sat beside him, watching quietly. Ethan continued reading. Another entry, then another. The deeper he went, the stranger the story became. Decades earlier, wealthy landowners had attempted to gain control of the mountain's water supply. The keepers existed to prevent that, to keep access equal, to stop monopolies, to protect families, ranches, towns, entire communities. Ethan slowly lowered the journal. The silence around him felt heavier now, because suddenly he understood. This wasn't just hidden infrastructure. This was power. The kind of power people fought over. The kind people killed careers for, destroyed lives for, maybe worse. Shadow suddenly stood. His ears rose. The dog looked toward another passage extending deeper into the facility. Ethan followed his gaze. The tunnel disappeared into darkness. More secrets, more answers, perhaps more questions. But before moving, Ethan looked down at the journal again. One line near the bottom of the page caught his attention. The handwriting appeared older, more personal. If you are reading this, then the mountain has chosen again. Ethan stared. The sentence felt directed at him. He turned the page. The next entry began with words that made his heart stop. To whoever inherits the house above, the lantern light flickered. The vast underground chamber stretched endlessly around him. And for the first time since discovering the hatch, Ethan realized something terrifying. Someone had expected him. Someone had planned for this moment long before he arrived. And somewhere deeper, inside the mountain, the rest of the story was waiting. The underground chamber felt different now. Not abandoned, not forgotten, purposeful. As though every pipe, every steel beam, every page in the journal had been placed exactly where it needed to be, waiting for him. Ethan sat at the wooden desk while Shadow rested beside his chair. The dog seemed unusually calm, almost comfortable, as if the deeper they ventured into the hidden facility, the more certain he became that they belonged there. The lantern cast a pool of golden light across the open journal. Dust drifted lazily through the air. Beyond the desk, darkness swallowed the massive chamber. Ethan turned the page. The handwriting remained steady, deliberate, disciplined. The sort of writing produced by someone who understood responsibility. To whoever inherits the house above. If you are reading this, then circumstances have unfolded as they were meant to. The mountain has chosen again. Ethan frowned. Chosen. The word felt strange. He continued reading. For more than 70 years, a caretaker has lived above this facility. Each generation passed the responsibility to the next. Not through wealth, not through power, but through character. Ethan leaned back slowly. The words sounded less like instructions and more like a test. Shadow lifted his head briefly. The dog's ears twitched. Then he settled again. Ethan kept reading. The facility beneath this mountain protects the Silver Ridge Aquifer. Without it, thousands would suffer. The ranches, the farms, the towns, the streams, everything begins here. Ethan glanced toward the enormous pipes stretching into darkness. For the first time, he truly understood their scale. This wasn't a local system. It was regional, the hidden heart of an entire valley. He turned another page. The first attempts to seize the aquifer began in 1958. Several wealthy interests attempted to purchase control of local water rights. They failed. The journal continued. More entries, more years, different names, different threats. The pattern remained the same. Whenever drought arrived, someone tried to gain control. Whenever resources became scarce, somebody sought ownership, and every time the keepers resisted, protecting access, protecting balance, protecting ordinary people. Ethan found himself admiring the unknown men and women who had carried the responsibility. Decades of service. No recognition, no reward, just duty. It reminded him of people he'd served with, the quiet professionals, the ones who never needed applause. The next entry made him stop. Today, we prevented another acquisition attempt. The investors never discovered the facility exists. That secret remains our greatest protection. Ethan read the sentence twice, then a third time. The facility's existence itself was classified, hidden, erased. No wonder the symbol on the hatch no longer existed. Whoever built this place wanted it forgotten. He continued reading for nearly an hour. Entry after entry, maintenance logs, water levels, drought reports, warnings. Then eventually the tone changed. The writing grew more personal, more urgent. The final caretaker had known his time was running out. March 14. My health continues to decline. The doctors have given me little reason for optimism. The mountain will soon require a new keeper. Ethan's chest tightened slightly. He flipped forward. Several entries described efforts to locate a successor. Most names were crossed out. Some were rejected. Others disappeared entirely. Then came another passage. I have decided the next keeper must be a veteran. Someone who understands sacrifice. Someone who understands service without recognition. Someone capable of placing community above self-interest. Ethan slowly lowered the journal. The silence around him deepened. A veteran. The words echoed inside his mind. He looked around the enormous underground facility. At the desk. At the journals. At the machinery. At the hidden world beneath the mountain. Then back to the page. The final caretaker hadn't been searching for just anyone. He'd been searching for someone specific. The realization made Ethan uneasy, because somehow, impossibly, the description fit him. Shadow suddenly stood. His ears rose. The dog moved toward another shelf near the rear wall. Ethan followed. Several metal storage boxes sat there, each covered in dust. One carried a handwritten label, personal records. The lock had rusted away years earlier. Ethan opened it. Inside sat dozens of folders, letters, documents, photographs. Most were old, very old. One folder immediately caught his attention. Succession review. His pulse quickened. Carefully, he opened it. Inside lay several pages covered in notes. Names, backgrounds, military records, community involvement, character assessments. The final caretaker had been evaluating potential successors for years. Then Ethan found something impossible. A photograph. Not recent, but recognizable. His stomach tightened. The image showed a military charity event from nearly 10 years earlier. A younger Ethan stood near the edge of the crowd. Shadow sat beside him. The photograph had been taken long before Ethan ever arrived in Colorado, long before he lost Emily, long before he became homeless. The picture had been placed inside the succession file. Ethan stared. His pulse hammered. How? Shadow looked up at him. The dog seemed equally puzzled. Another note rested behind the photograph. The handwriting matched the journal. Candidate demonstrates resilience, strong service record, exceptional bond with working dog, possesses integrity despite personal hardship. Continue observation. Ethan's throat went dry. Observation. Someone had been watching him, not recently, years ago. The mountain's caretaker had somehow known who he was, known about Shadow, known enough to place him inside the file. The discovery left him speechless. He looked at the date. 7 years earlier, long before the auction, long before any of this. A chill crawled across his skin. Because the inheritance suddenly wasn't an accident. The auction wasn't an accident. The house wasn't an accident. Somewhere along the way, someone had arranged events to lead him here. Shadow nudged his hand gently. The contact grounded him, helped him think. Ethan exhaled slowly. Somebody knew. The dog stared back. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure whether that realization comforted him or frightened him. Hours passed. Outside, darkness settled over the mountains. Inside the facility, Ethan continued reading, learning, understanding. The final caretaker's entries became increasingly urgent. Then he reached the last journal. The final pages. The final months. The handwriting had become weaker, more fragile. Yet, one entry stood out immediately. If you are reading this, then my greatest fear has likely returned. Someone will eventually come for the aquifer. They always do. Ethan sat forward. The next line made his stomach tighten. The man currently acquiring land throughout the valley concerns me deeply. His resources continue expanding. His influence continues growing. If he discovers the facility, everything we protected may be lost. Ethan turned the page. Only one name appeared, written clearly, written deliberately. Warren Hale. The lantern flickered. The vast underground chamber suddenly felt colder. The name from the diner. The man who had entered and instantly changed the atmosphere of the room. The man every rancher seemed uncomfortable discussing. The final caretaker had known about him years ago, and apparently feared him. Shadow stood immediately, his body stiffened. The dog's ears locked toward a tunnel, disappearing deeper into the facility. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Ethan looked up. The tunnel stretched into darkness, silent still. Yet something had changed. The dog sensed it first, just as he always did. And somewhere beyond the reach of the lantern, hidden deeper inside the mountain, another secret was waiting. One that would explain exactly why Warren Hale had spent years searching for something buried beneath the Rockies. Shadow's growl echoed softly through the underground chamber. The sound seemed unnaturally loud against the silence. Ethan rose from the desk and aimed his flashlight toward the tunnel, disappearing into darkness. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. Yet the German shepherd remained fixed on the passage, alert, focused, listening, the same way he had listened to the basement wall before discovering the hatch. Ethan had learned long ago that ignoring Shadow was usually a mistake. Still, exhaustion had begun catching up with him. Hours of reading journals beneath the mountain had blurred together. His mind was overloaded. Water systems, secret caretakers, the hidden facility, the succession file, Warren Hale. Most of all, the unsettling realization that someone had been watching him years before he ever arrived in Colorado. The mountain seemed determined to answer one question while creating 3 more. Tomorrow, Ethan said quietly. Shadow looked back at him. We'll come back tomorrow. The dog reluctantly relaxed. Together, they made their way toward the stairs. As they climbed, Ethan glanced back one final time. The lantern light illuminated the desk, the journals, the massive pipes stretching into darkness, the hidden heart of the valley. Then the shadows swallowed everything. By the time they emerged into the basement, night had fully settled over the mountain. Cold air seeped through the cracks in the house. The old structure creaked softly. For the first time since discovering the hatch, Ethan locked the basement door behind him. Not because he feared something inside, but because he feared someone outside. The thought followed him into sleep. The next morning arrived clear and cold. Fresh snow dusted the highest peaks. Sunlight poured across the valley below. For a few minutes, standing on the porch with coffee in hand, Ethan almost convinced himself everything was normal. Then he noticed the truck. A dark pickup parked on the road below the property. Far enough away to avoid attention. Close enough to watch. His pulse quickened. The vehicle remained there for nearly 10 minutes. Then it drove away, slowly, purposefully. Shadow watched it disappear. The dog didn't bark, he simply stared. The same way he had stared at the black SUV in town. Ethan didn't like that, not one bit. Later that afternoon, he drove into Silver Ridge. He needed supplies, more batteries, fuel, a few basic tools, and perhaps more information. The town appeared peaceful beneath the autumn sunlight, yet Ethan noticed things he had missed before. Several storefronts sat empty. Some ranches on the outskirts looked neglected. Fields appeared dry despite recent weather. The valley carried subtle signs of struggle. At Boone's diner, Martha greeted him with her usual blunt honesty. "You look like a man who found something." Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. Martha smirked. "I've been reading people longer than you've been shaving." Ethan smiled. despite himself. That obvious? Very. She poured more coffee. So what did you find? Ethan hesitated. Not because he distrusted her, because the truth sounded impossible. Fortunately, Martha saved him from answering. Never mind. She leaned against the counter. The mountain's secrets belong to the mountain. Ethan studied her. You know more than you're saying. Everybody in Silver Ridge knows more than they're saying. The answer wasn't helpful, but it felt honest. A familiar voice interrupted them. Ethan, he turned. A woman in a deputy's uniform stood near the entrance. Early 40s, sharp eyes, confident posture. The badge on her chest read, Rachel Mercer. Ethan stood. I don't think we've met. We haven't. She extended her hand. I'm Deputy Rachel Mercer. Ethan shook it. The deputy glanced at Shadow. A smile crossed her face. Beautiful dog. Don't tell him that. Why? He already knows. Rachel laughed. The tension immediately eased. She sat across from him. Mind if I ask you a question? Depends. About the mountain house. There it was again. The house. Always the house. Ethan nodded cautiously. What about it? Rachel folded her hands. Have you had any visitors? The question surprised him. No. Nobody? He thought about the truck parked below the property. Not yet. Rachel seemed relieved, then concerned. Good. Why? The deputy glanced around the diner before answering. Because whenever somebody buys land near that ridge, certain people become interested. Martha snorted from behind the counter. That's one way of putting it. Rachel ignored the comment. Ethan leaned forward. You're talking about Warren Hale. The deputy's expression changed instantly. Not fear, something close to frustration. You've heard of him. Martha gave me the short version. Rachel sighed. The short version is complicated enough. Ethan waited. The deputy lowered her voice. Hale owns more land than anyone else in the valley. So every year he owns more. The answer seemed simple. Too simple, Rachel continued. Ranches fail. People sell. Hale buys. That's business. Rachel shook her head. Not always. Martha set down a coffee pot harder than necessary. The sound echoed through the diner. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Rachel said quietly, There's a reason so many families have lost their properties. Ethan noticed the way both women avoided specifics, as if discussing Hale openly made them uncomfortable or cautious. Then Rachel changed the subject. Just be careful. Of what? The deputy looked directly at him. Of attracting attention. The warning lingered long after she left. That evening, Ethan drove through the valley before returning home. The landscape looked beautiful at first glance. Rolling ranchland, golden grass, wooden fences, open skies. Then he noticed something else. Dry creek beds, nearly empty ponds, fields struggling despite recent snowmelt. The signs appeared everywhere. Water problems. The realization hit him immediately. The aquifer, the facility, the hidden water system beneath the mountain. Suddenly, everything connected. The struggling ranches, the land acquisitions, the caretaker journals, Warren Hale. A cold feeling settled in Ethan's chest. If the mountain controlled the valley's water, then whoever controlled the mountain could control far more than water. They could control survival itself. By sunset, he was back at the house. The mountain stood silent beneath the fading sky. Shadow immediately headed toward the basement. But halfway there, the dog stopped. His ears rose. A low growl emerged. Ethan froze. What is it? Shadow turned toward the rear side of the property. The forest. Ethan followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then movement. A figure. Far away. Standing among the trees, watching the house. The person remained motionless for only a few seconds. Then disappeared into the forest. Gone. Like a shadow. Ethan's pulse accelerated. He hurried toward the tree line. Shadow sprinted ahead. Together they reached the spot. Nothing. No person. No vehicle. Only footprints in the damp soil. Fresh, recent watching. The realization sent a chill through him. Somebody had been observing the house, and judging by the direction of the tracks, they had been watching for quite a while. Shadow sniffed the ground, then looked back toward the mountain, toward the hidden facility beneath it, toward the secret Warren Hale had apparently spent years searching for. And for the first time since arriving in Silver Ridge, Ethan stopped feeling like the hunter. Someone else had entered the game, and they already knew exactly where he lived. The realization followed Ethan through the entire night. The footprints remained clear in his mind long after darkness settled over the mountain. Someone had stood in the trees, watching, not passing through, not hiking, watching. The difference mattered. The old house creaked softly in the cold wind. Shadow refused to leave the windows. The German shepherd moved from room to room, checking the property with quiet determination. Every so often he would stop and stare into the darkness beyond the glass. Listening, searching. Ethan trusted that instinct, because the dog had been right about everything else. The basement, the hatch, the facility, the journals, the mountain itself. Around midnight, Ethan finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The nightmare arrived almost immediately. Dust, gunfire, the roar of helicopters, a teammate calling his name, the sharp crack of incoming fire. The familiar helplessness, the overwhelming certainty that someone wasn't coming home. Ethan jolted awake, his heart pounded, sweat covered his face despite the freezing air. For a moment he didn't know where he was. The mountain house, the fireplace, the silence. Slowly reality returned. Then he felt it. Shadow. The dog had already moved beside him. His head rested against Ethan's chest, grounding him. Steady, present. Real. Ethan closed his eyes, focused on the dog's breathing. One breath, then another. The panic slowly retreated. Good boy. Shadow's tail thumped softly against the floor. Outside, snow began falling. The first real storm of the season arrived before dawn. By morning, several inches covered the mountain. The world looked transformed, white, silent, beautiful, dangerous. Ethan spent most of the day reinforcing the house, boarding weak windows, securing loose sections of the roof, gathering additional firewood. The work helped. Physical labor always helped. It gave his mind something useful to focus on. But by late afternoon, trouble arrived. The first sign was the window, the kitchen window, smashed. Ethan discovered it while carrying wood inside. Glass littered the floor. Cold air poured into the room. He froze. Shadow immediately began searching. The dog moved through every room, every doorway, every corner. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared damaged beyond the broken glass, which somehow made it worse. The message felt deliberate, not theft, a warning. That evening, Ethan drove into Silver Ridge. He showed Rachel photographs. The deputy studied them carefully. Could have been kids. Neither of them believed it. There aren't many kids living up a mountain during a snowstorm. Rachel sighed. No. She handed back the phone. Keep documenting everything. You think it's hail? The deputy hesitated. Thinking and proving aren't the same thing. The answer told Ethan everything he needed to know. Before leaving, Rachel gave him her direct number. Call me if anything feels wrong. Ethan nodded. The concern in her eyes seemed genuine. By the time he returned home, darkness had fallen again. Snow continued, drifting across the property. Shadow immediately headed toward the basement. That had become routine now. The facility called to both of them. The hidden world beneath the mountain felt more honest than the one above it. Down there, secrets at least had reasons. Ethan spent hours reading additional journals. The deeper he went, the more troubling the history became. Every few decades, someone attempted to seize control of the aquifer. Every few decades, the keepers stopped them, sometimes through legal battles, sometimes through secrecy, sometimes through sacrifice. The final caretaker's warnings grew increasingly urgent, especially regarding Warren Hale. Several entries described unexplained surveying activity near the mountain. Unknown contractors, unauthorized drilling, attempts to trace underground water routes. The man had been searching for years. The realization settled heavily on Ethan. Then Shadow barked, sharp, sudden, alert. Ethan looked up immediately. The dog stood facing another section of tunnel. His body was rigid, every muscle tight. The flashlight beam swept across the darkness. Nothing. Then Ethan heard it. A metallic sound, faint but unmistakable. Clang. like steel striking some steel somewhere deeper inside the facility. His pulse quickened. He grabbed the lantern. Shadow moved ahead. The pair followed the tunnel. The underground passage twisted through sections of the mountain Ethan hadn't yet explored. Pipes lined the walls. Ancient maintenance signs hung from rusted brackets. The deeper they traveled, the colder the air became. Then they found it. A valve room, large, circular, filled with machinery, and somebody had been there recently. Fresh footprints crossed the dusty floor. Ethan knelt. The tracks weren't old, hours old at most, maybe less. His stomach tightened. Someone else had discovered another entrance. Someone else had entered the facility. Shadow growled. The dog moved toward a large valve assembly near the back wall. Ethan followed. His flashlight revealed fresh tool marks. Several bolts had been loosened, not repaired, sabotaged. The realization hit immediately. Someone was damaging the system, intentionally. A cold anger replaced his fear. The journals had warned him. The threats weren't coming. They were already here. The next few days became increasingly difficult. Every time Ethan fixed one problem, another appeared. A section of fence cut, fuel missing from storage cans, tire tracks near the property. The pressure continued building, slowly, methodically, designed to wear him down, designed to make him leave. Instead, it strengthened his resolve. The mountain needed a keeper. The valley needed protection. And for the first time in years, Ethan had something worth fighting for. Then came the worst night. The snowstorm arrived after sunset. Heavy, relentless, wind screamed across the ridge. Visibility disappeared entirely. Most people would have stayed inside. But sometime after midnight, Shadow began barking. Not warning, alarm. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. The dog sprinted toward the rear of the property, toward the hidden section of mountain concealing the facility. Ethan followed through knee-deep snow. Then he saw them, 3 figures, moving through the storm, flashlights, tools, heading toward an old maintenance access, partially hidden among the rocks. The same access route Ethan hadn't even discovered yet. His pulse hammered. The intruders froze when they saw him. For one moment, everyone stood still, snow swirling between them. Then the strangers turned and ran. Shadow launched forward instantly. The German shepherd disappeared into the storm. Shadow! Ethan chased after them. The mountain became chaos. Snow, darkness, shouting, flashing lights. The figures scrambled through the trees. One slipped, another vanished downslope. Shadow pursued relentlessly. Then came the sound, a sharp yelp. The kind Ethan never wanted to hear. His blood ran cold. Shadow! The dog emerged moments later from the darkness, limping, one front leg barely touching the ground. The intruders were gone. The storm had swallowed them. Ethan dropped to one knee. His heart sank. Shadow's shoulder was bleeding. Not severe, but enough. Enough to hurt. Enough to matter. The German shepherd tried to stand tall anyway. Still searching. Still protecting. Still refusing to quit. Ethan gently wrapped his arms around him. For a moment, neither moved. Snow settled across both of them. The mountain stood silent around them. And suddenly, a terrible thought entered Ethan's mind. For years after Emily died, Shadow had been the reason he kept going. The dog had carried him through grief, through loneliness, through homelessness, through nightmares, through everything. Now, for the first time, Ethan found himself confronting a possibility he never wanted to face. What if someday Shadow couldn't protect him anymore? The thought hurt more than any threat Warren Hale could ever make. Ethan carried the dog back toward the house. The storm continued raging. The mountain remained hidden beneath darkness. But one thing had become painfully clear. This was no longer a mystery, no longer a search, no longer an inheritance. It had become a battle. And someone out there had just proven they were willing to fight for whatever was hidden beneath the mountain. The storm finally passed 2 days later. Sunlight returned to the Rockies. Fresh snow glittered across the peaks like scattered diamonds. But inside the mountain house, the mood remained heavy. Shadow lay near the fireplace, with his injured shoulder carefully wrapped. The veterinarian in Silver Ridge had assured Ethan the injury would heal. Nothing was broken, no permanent damage, just time, rest, patience. Three things neither Ethan nor Shadow enjoyed. The German Shepherd hated being confined. Every time Ethan looked away, Shadow attempted to stand. Every time Ethan told him to rest, the dog sighed dramatically, as if recovering from an injury was the greatest injustice he'd ever faced. At least the stubbornness meant he was healing. Ethan tried to focus on that, because the alternative thoughts were darker. What if Shadow had arrived a few seconds later? What if the intruders had reached the facility? What if next time things became worse? The questions lingered, so Ethan buried himself in work, repairing damage, reviewing the journals, learning everything possible about the mountain. The more he read, the more one realization became impossible to ignore. The facility contained far more than water infrastructure. It contained history, hidden history. Entire sections of records described people who had devoted their lives to protecting the aquifer. Most names meant nothing to him, until one afternoon. Shadow slept beside the desk, while Ethan sorted through another storage room deep inside the facility. The room sat beyond the valve chamber, hidden behind a rusted steel door. Unlike the main archives, this area felt personal, private. Boxes labeled family, correspondence, memorials. The final caretaker had preserved more than maintenance records. He had preserved lives. Ethan carefully opened another metal container. Dust floated into the lantern light. Inside sat dozens of photographs, old black and white images, community events, ranch families, construction crews, caretakers standing proudly beside sections of the facility. He examined each one, then stopped, his breath caught. A photograph rested near the bottom. Unlike the others, this image appeared newer, perhaps 30 years old. Several men stood together beside a mountain stream. Most wore work clothes. One wore a military uniform. Ethan's heart skipped. The photograph trembled slightly in his hands. No, it couldn't be. Yet it was. The face was unmistakable. Even younger, even thinner, even before the gray hair. He knew that face, because he had spent most of his childhood wondering why it disappeared. His father, Daniel Cross. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared. The underground chamber seemed to disappear around him. The world narrowed to the image. His father stood beside several members of the caretaker network, smiling, alive, part of something. Ethan lowered himself into a chair. His pulse hammered. The photograph shattered decades of assumptions. Growing up, he'd believed his father abandoned them. That was the story everyone told. His mother rarely spoke about him. When she did, pain filled her voice. Then eventually, even those conversations stopped. The man became a ghost, a missing chapter, an absence. Yet here he was, standing inside a photograph hidden beneath a mountain in Colorado, connected to the facility, connected to the keepers, connected to everything. Shadow slowly lifted his head. The dog sensed the shift immediately. Ethan stared at the photograph. His throat felt tight. His chest felt heavier, because anger and hope were colliding inside him. If his father had abandoned them, why was he here? And if he hadn't, then what had really happened? His eyes dropped toward the back of the photograph. Words had been written there, faded, but readable. Summer 1989. Aquifer Protection Committee. Daniel Cross and regional caretakers. Ethan swallowed hard. His father hadn't merely visited. He'd been involved, deeply involved. The discovery sent him searching through every remaining box, hour after hour, full folder after folder. The deeper he searched, the more evidence appeared. Reports, letters, meeting notes, references to Daniel Cross, always connected to the mountain, always connected to protection efforts, always connected to the aquifer. Then he found the safe. The steel box sat hidden behind shelving near the rear wall, almost invisible beneath decades of dust. Its lock had already been opened years earlier. Inside sat a single folder. One name appeared across the front, Daniel Cross. Ethan's hands trembled. Slowly he opened it. The first document inside was a service record. Military, then another, then several photographs, then letters. Dozens of letters. most addressed to the caretaker. One in particular immediately drew his attention. It had never been mailed, never delivered. The envelope carried his mother's name, Margaret Cross. Ethan carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting matched his father's. "If you're reading this, then things went wrong." The sentence hit him like a punch, he continued. "I wanted to come home. God knows I wanted to. But the people pursuing this mountain discovered more than they should have. The caretakers believe leaving is no longer safe for you, for Ethan." Ethan stopped breathing. His own name stared back from the page. The next lines blurred slightly as emotion surged through him. "I pray someday he'll understand why I stayed away. I pray he'll know I never abandoned him." The silence became overwhelming. Shadow slowly approached. The dog rested his head against Ethan's knee, grounding him, steadying him. The familiar gesture helped, a little, but not enough, because decades of anger suddenly felt unstable. Every painful memory, every unanswered question, every lonely birthday, every moment he'd believed his father chose something else over family. Now uncertainty replaced certainty. What if none of it had been true? Ethan continued reading. The letter described threats, pressure, attempts to identify caretaker locations, individuals seeking control over regional water systems. The same conflict, repeated through generations. His father hadn't disappeared chasing another life. He had disappeared protecting something. Protecting people. Possibly protecting Ethan himself. The final paragraph nearly broke him. "Tell my son that courage is not the absence of fear. It's choosing what matters most when fear demands otherwise. Tell him I loved him every day, even when I could not be there." The words blurred. Ethan lowered the letter. For several minutes he sat silently. The underground room felt impossibly still. Only Shadow remained beside him. Patient, loyal, present. Eventually Ethan looked toward the photograph again. The image felt different now. Not evidence of abandonment. Evidence of sacrifice. Painful, complicated, incomplete, but different. Then another realization struck him. If his father had been part of the caretaker network, someone had hidden the truth. Deliberately. The records didn't merely reveal what happened. They revealed what someone wanted forgotten. The question became obvious. Who benefited from burying the truth? Who wanted Daniel Cross erased? Who wanted the caretakers forgotten, and why? Shadow suddenly lifted his head. A low growl emerged. Ethan followed the dog's gaze toward another section of records inside the safe. One folder remained unopened. Unlike the others, it carried a red marking. Confidential. Inside rested several pages, and on the very first page appeared a name Ethan now recognized all too well. Warren Hale. The date shocked him. The document was nearly 20 years old, which meant one thing. Warren Hale's connection to the mountain began far earlier than anyone realized. And somewhere inside those pages waited the answer to a mystery even older than his father's disappearance. The underground archive felt colder than before. Ethan sat alone at the desk beneath the lantern's glow while snow drifted silently across the mountain far above. Shadow rested nearby. His injured shoulder was healing, slowly, but the old German shepherd refused to leave Ethan's side. The dog watched him carefully as Ethan opened the confidential file. Inside were reports stretching back nearly 2 decades, land purchases, survey maps, corporate records, water rights acquisitions. At first glance, they appeared ordinary. Then the pattern emerged. Every struggling ranch Warren Hale purchased sat directly above major underground water routes. Every property acquisition followed the same formula. Drought, financial pressure, foreclosure, purchase, again, again, again. The file contained notes written by the final caretaker. The observations grew increasingly concerned over the years. Hale does not seek land. He seeks control. Ethan turned another page. The next note was even more troubling. He believes the mountain contains the source. If he discovers the aquifer control facility, the valley will become dependent upon him. Ethan leaned back slowly. The caretaker had understood Hale long before anyone else. This wasn't about development. It wasn't about ranching. It wasn't about business. It was about power. Water was merely the tool. The final report stopped him cold. Projected outcome. If Hale acquires system control, over 70% of regional water access could fall under a single authority within 15 years. Ethan stared at the page. 70%. Entire communities, entire livelihoods, entire generations. The hidden facility beneath the mountain wasn't simply valuable. It was priceless. And suddenly, Ethan understood why people had followed him, why the house had been watched, why intruders risked entering the mountain during a snowstorm. The battle had never been about ownership of the property. The house was only the door. The real prize sat beneath it. A sharp bark interrupted his thoughts. Shadow had stood. The dog faced the tunnel leading toward the main control chamber. His ears were forward, alert, focused. Ethan immediately grabbed the lantern. Together they followed the passage. The control room seemed almost alive now. The enormous facility hummed softly around them. Water flowed through massive pipes hidden inside the mountain. Ancient machinery remained operational despite decades of isolation. The screens on the main control console glowed faintly. Most had activated automatically after Ethan restored several systems. For weeks, he had only understood fragments of what they displayed. Tonight, something changed. A new screen had awakened. The display showed a detailed map of the entire valley. Blue lines spread beneath ranches, farms, streams, and towns. Water routes, distribution channels, reservoir connections, the hidden circulatory system of Silver Ridge. Ethan stepped closer. Words slowly appeared. Primary control status available. His stomach tightened. Another message followed. Authorized keeper access granted. Shadow sat beside him, watching, waiting. The machine seemed to recognize Ethan, as if the succession process described in the journals had never truly ended. The console suddenly illuminated another section. A sealed compartment opened with a soft click. Inside rested a leather folder. Dust covered its surface. Embossed across the front were two words: Final Protocol. Ethan carefully opened it. The pages inside were brief, direct, urgent. If the facility is compromised and control can no longer be protected, the keeper must activate the Freedom Lock. Ethan frowned.
The Freedom Lock.
He had never encountered the term before. He continued reading. Activation permanently removes all human control over aquifer distribution. Natural flow systems will remain operational. Water access will continue. Ownership becomes impossible. The valley will belong to no one. The words seemed almost unreal. He read them again and again. The meaning remained the same. The Freedom Lock was the mountain's final safeguard. The last defense against corruption, against greed, against control itself. But there was a cost. Once activated, it could never be reversed. Ever. Shadow nudged his hand gently. Ethan looked toward the glowing valley map. The temptation appeared immediately. He hated admitting it. But it was there. The system could make him wealthy, incredibly wealthy. The man who controlled the mountain could control development, resources, access, influence, everything. For a brief moment, he imagined what that might mean. A secure home, financial stability, freedom from the hardships that had defined recent years. No more sleeping in trucks, no more uncertainty, no more survival. The possibility felt dangerously attractive. Then another image appeared. Emily, the woman who spent her life helping others. The woman who once told him that character mattered most when nobody was watching. He thought about his father, a man he had misunderstood for decades. A man who sacrificed everything protecting people he would never meet. Then he thought about the ranchers, the families, the children growing up in the valley, the people who depended upon water they never knew flowed through the mountain. The answer seemed obvious, yet making the choice still hurt, because true sacrifice always costs something. A sudden engine noise echoed faintly through the facility. Ethan froze. Shadow growled instantly. The sound came from outside. Vehicles, multiple vehicles. His pulse quickened. He rushed toward a monitoring station described in the journals. Several camera feeds flickered alive. The images were grainy, old yet clear enough. 3 black SUVs climbed the mountain road, a 4th followed behind. The convoy stopped near the house. Doors opened, men emerged, not hikers, not tourists, not neighbors, professionals. The final vehicle arrived last. A familiar figure stepped out. Tall, confident, expensive coat, Warren Hale. Ethan stared. The man surveyed the property calmly, as if he already owned it. Shadow's growl deepened. The dog stood between Ethan and the screen. Protective, ready. Another camera activated automatically. Audio crackled through hidden speakers. Warren Hale's voice echoed inside the control room. "Mr. Cross." The calmness unsettled Ethan. "There's no need to hide." The man looked directly toward the house, toward the mountain, toward the secret beneath it. "I think we've both spent enough time pretending." The convoy remained motionless behind him. No threats, no shouting, no aggression, only confidence. The confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Another speaker crackled. "I'd like to make you an offer." Ethan's stomach tightened. He already knew what was coming. The mountain seemed to know too, because at that exact moment, the main control screen illuminated a final message. Keeper decision required. The freedom lock, or control, principle, or power. Everything the keepers had faced for generations now rested before him. And Warren Hale had arrived personally to make sure Ethan chose the wrong answer. Outside, snow drifted across the Colorado mountains. Inside, the hidden heart of the valley waited. For the first time since finding the mountain house, Ethan understood the true weight of the inheritance. It had never been a gift. It had always been a test. And before the night ended, he would have to decide what kind of man he truly was. The control room glowed softly beneath the mountain. Ancient screens illuminated the darkness. Water flowed through the hidden arteries of the valley, and outside, Warren Hale waited, patient, confident, certain. Ethan stood before the main console, while Shadow remained at his side. The Freedom Lock message continued blinking across the screen. Keeper decision required. The words felt heavier than steel. For a moment, Ethan closed his eyes. He thought about the truck he had once lived in, the endless parking lots, the cold nights, the loneliness after Emily died, the years spent drifting without purpose. Then he imagined what Warren Hale was offering: money, security, power, a future without struggle. For a brief second, the temptation returned. Then another memory surfaced. His father's letter. "Tell my son that courage is not the absence of fear. It's choosing what matters most when fear demands otherwise." Ethan opened his eyes. The answer was already there. The mountain didn't belong to him. It never had. A loud metallic crash echoed through the tunnel. Shadow instantly sprang to his feet. The dog growled. Deep, dangerous. Another crash followed. Closer. Ethan turned toward the security monitor. The feed showed the hidden maintenance entrance. The one Shadow had discovered during the snowstorm. Its steel door now hung open. Several men were entering the facility. Flashlights swept across the darkness. They moved quickly, purposefully. Someone had shown them the route. Warren Hale. The realization came immediately. The offer had never been the real plan. The offer was simply a distraction. Shadow barked sharply. The men were already inside. Ethan grabbed the radio system connected to the old facility. A voice crackled from another speaker. "Warren Hale." "You don't have much time, Mr. Cross." His voice remained calm, almost friendly. "I'd prefer this ends peacefully." Ethan laughed once. There wasn't any humor in it. "You brought people into my house." "I brought people to protect an investment." The answer made Ethan's jaw tighten. The mountain trembled slightly as distant footsteps echoed through the tunnels. The intruders were moving deeper, toward the control room, toward the aquifer, toward the future of the valley itself. Shadow stood between Ethan and the tunnel entrance, waiting, watching, ready. The old soldier and his dog, just like countless times before. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. For years after leaving the military, he had searched for purpose. Tonight, he finally understood why the mountain had chosen him. Not because he was perfect, not because he was powerful, because when the moment arrived, he would do what needed to be done. A new voice suddenly echoed through the radio. "Deputy Rachel Mercer." Ethan. His eyes widened. Rachel? We intercepted radio traffic. Static crackled. Help is coming. Ethan looked toward the security screen. The intruders had nearly reached the lower chambers. There isn't time. Silence followed. Rachel understood immediately. Neither of them needed further explanation. The mountain had already reached its final chapter. Ethan turned back toward the control console. The Freedom Lock lever sat beneath a steel cover. Simple, unremarkable, permanent. One pull. Everything changed forever. The footsteps grew louder. Shadow's growl deepened. The first flashlight beams appeared at the far end of the tunnel. Moving, approaching. Several figures emerged from the darkness. Not rushing, confident. As though victory already belonged to them. Behind them walked Warren Hale. His expensive coat looked strangely out of place beneath the mountain. He stopped several yards away, studying the room, studying the console, studying Ethan. For the first time, Hale saw the aquifer's heart, and his eyes lit with satisfaction. There it is. His voice carried genuine admiration. 20 years. He slowly shook his head. 20 years searching. Ethan said nothing. Hale took another step forward. Do you have any idea what this place is worth? The wrong question. Hale smiled faintly. No. He looked toward the glowing map. The only question, Shadow barked sharply. Hale glanced at the dog. The smile faded slightly. You've got a remarkable animal. He thinks you're a problem. The men behind Hale shifted uneasily. Nobody wanted to move closer to Shadow. The German shepherd's reputation seemed obvious even without words. Hale looked back at Ethan. Last chance. The mountain hummed around them. The hidden water system continued flowing. The valley remained alive. Waiting. Hale spread his hands. We can both walk away rich. Ethan looked at the screen. Then at Hale, then at Shadow. The answer remained unchanged. No. Silence. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Hale sighed. A disappointed father. A failed negotiation. An inevitable ending. That's unfortunate. The men behind him stepped forward. Not charging, not attacking, simply advancing. Trying to reach the console. Trying to reach control. Shadow moved instantly. The German shepherd planted himself between the group and Ethan, growling, every muscle tight, every instinct focused. The intruders stopped. Nobody wanted to challenge him. Not after seeing the determination in his eyes. Hale's frustration became visible. Move the dog. Ethan didn't answer. Shadow's growl became louder. One man attempted another step. The German shepherd barked explosively. The sound thundered through the chamber. The man immediately backed away. The standoff stretched, seconds, then longer. The mountain seemed to hold its breath. Hale realized what was happening. The dog wasn't buying Ethan minutes. He was buying seconds. Seconds were enough. Ethan reached for the steel cover. The Freedom Lock waited beneath. Hale's eyes widened. No. For the first time all night, genuine fear appeared in his voice. The realization struck him. He wasn't about to gain control. He was about to lose the possibility forever. Hale stepped forward. Shadow instantly blocked him. The dog stood firm despite his healing shoulder. Pain didn't matter. Age didn't matter. Nothing mattered except protecting his partner. The mountain. The mission. Just like always. Ethan opened the steel cover. The lever gleamed beneath the control lights. Heavy, final, permanent. Hale's voice echoed through the chamber. Think about what you're doing. Ethan nodded. I am. The valley map glowed across the screen. Streams, wells, farms, families. People who would never know his name. People who would never know what happened beneath the mountain tonight. And somehow that felt right. Hale took another desperate step. Shadow blocked him again. The old German shepherd's legs trembled slightly. His injured shoulder strained, yet he refused to move. The sight nearly broke Ethan's heart. Years together. Deployments, loss, recovery, loneliness. The dog had carried him through all of it. Now Shadow was carrying him one final time, buying him the moment he needed. Ethan wrapped both hands around the lever. The mountain seemed to go silent. No footsteps, no voices, no machinery. Only the sound of water. The sound the keepers had protected for generations. Hale stared. The intruders stared. Shadow never looked away from Ethan. The old dog trusted him completely. just as he always had. Ethan pulled the freedom lock. The lever moved slowly, then locked into place. Deep inside the mountain, something enormous awakened. A thunderous roar echoed through the facility. Stone trembled. Steel groaned. Ancient gates began moving. Massive mechanisms engaged for the first time in decades. Warning lights flashed. The valley map transformed. Ownership protocols disappeared. Control systems shut down. Distribution authority terminated. The mountain was releasing itself, freeing itself. The freedom lock had been activated, forever. Hale stared at the screen, his face turned pale. No, the word barely escaped his lips. The realization crushed him. 20 years, gone. The dream of ownership, gone. The valley could never belong to anyone now. Not Hale, not Ethan, not anybody. The mountain had chosen freedom. Then another sound broke through the chaos. A sharp yelp. Ethan's heart stopped. Shadow staggered. The old dog remained standing, but barely. The strain of the confrontation, the injury, the exhaustion, everything had finally caught up with him. Shadow. Ethan rushed forward. The German shepherd slowly sat down beside him, breathing heavily, still alert, still watching, still protecting. Even now, the mountain continued sealing itself around them. The freedom lock was complete. The valley had been saved. But as Ethan knelt beside his oldest friend, only one question mattered. Was Shadow going to be all right? The mountain continued trembling around them. Deep beneath the Colorado Rockies, ancient mechanisms completed their final task. Massive gates sealed. Control systems shut down. Ownership vanished forever. Yet Ethan barely noticed. His entire world had narrowed to one aging German shepherd. Shadow. The dog's breathing was heavy, but steady. That mattered. Ethan gently rested a hand against his neck. The familiar warmth remained. The familiar loyalty remained. Most importantly, so did the life. The old dog opened his eyes. For a brief moment, he looked almost annoyed, as if the entire situation had interrupted a perfectly good evening. A weak tail thumped against the concrete floor. Once, then again. Relief hit Ethan so hard he nearly laughed. "You stubborn old soldier," Shadow blinked. The dog seemed to accept the compliment. Several minutes later, Deputy Rachel Mercer arrived with emergency responders and county officials. Warren Hale remained silent throughout the investigation. For the first time since Ethan had met him, the wealthy developer looked defeated, not angry, not furious, defeated. The freedom lock had taken away the one thing he truly wanted: control. Without the ability to manipulate water access, his long-term strategy collapsed. The mountain had ended the fight in the only way that mattered: by refusing to belong to anyone. As dawn approached, Ethan and Shadow finally emerged from the hidden facility. The first sunlight touched the snow-covered peaks. Cold air filled Ethan's lungs. For a long moment, he simply stood on the porch, watching, breathing, listening. The valley stretched below him, peaceful, unchanged, yet somehow completely different. The battle had ended, the mountain had chosen, and the world kept turning. Weeks passed. Winter slowly surrendered to spring. The transformation began quietly. At first, it appeared in the streams. Creek beds that had remained dry for years began flowing again. Then wells improved. Reservoir levels stabilized. Ranches that had struggled through repeated shortages suddenly found reliable water returning. Nobody celebrated publicly. Most people never learned the full truth, but they noticed the results. Fields turned green. Livestock thrived. Families stopped talking about selling their land. The valley began healing. One morning, Ethan drove through Silver Ridge and saw something he hadn't seen before: optimism. The change showed itself in small ways. A closed storefront reopened. Fresh paint appeared on old buildings. Children played outside the school. People smiled more often. Hope had returned, not because anyone became rich, because people no longer feared losing everything. Meanwhile, Warren Hale's empire slowly unraveled. Without artificial shortages driving property values downward, ranch owners stopped selling. Several investigations followed. Business arrangements once hidden beneath complicated paperwork attracted attention. The details mattered less than the outcome. His influence faded. The valley moved on without him, and for the first time in decades, nobody controlled its future. Months later, the mountain house looked completely different. New windows reflected the sunlight. The roof had been repaired, the porch rebuilt. Fresh paint covered the weathered walls. The house no longer looked abandoned. It looked alive. More importantly, it felt alive. Ethan spent much of that summer transforming the property. Not into a business, not into a tourist attraction, into something Emily would have loved. A retreat. A place where struggling veterans could stay while rebuilding their lives. Nothing complicated. A few guest rooms, shared meals, fishing trips, conversations around a fire. A place where people could remember they weren't alone. Word spread quietly. One veteran became 2, then 5, then 10. Some stayed a weekend, others stayed longer. The mountain offered something many of them hadn't found elsewhere. Peace. And every guest met Shadow. The old German shepherd became the unofficial ambassador of the property. Children adored him. Veterans trusted him. Everyone seemed drawn to him. Perhaps because loyalty is something people recognize immediately when they see it. One evening in early autumn, nearly a year after Ethan purchased the house, Deputy Rachel Mercer arrived carrying a weathered envelope. "I found something." Ethan looked up from the porch. "What kind of something?" Rachel smiled. "The kind you've been searching for." The envelope was old, very old. His name appeared on the front, Ethan Cross. The handwriting looked familiar. His heartbeat quickened. He already knew why. Slowly, he opened it. Inside rested a letter. The signature at the bottom confirmed his suspicion. Daniel Cross, his father. The letter had been written decades earlier. Long before the auction. Long before Ethan ever discovered the mountain. Long before he understood any of it. He began reading. "If you're holding this letter, then the mountain has finally brought you home." Ethan sat down heavily. Rachel quietly stepped away, giving him privacy, giving him space. The words blurred slightly as he continued. "I never wanted you to inherit money. Money disappears. I never wanted you to inherit power. Power corrupts. I wanted you to inherit purpose." The sentence struck deep. The letter continued. "The mountain was always intended for you. Not because you are my son. Because I believed you would choose people over yourself. The same choice every keeper eventually faces." Ethan swallowed hard. His father had known years before, known the mountain's future, known the type of man Ethan would become. Then came another revelation, one final surprise. The letter explained how Shadow entered Ethan's life. Years earlier, after Daniel Cross joined the caretaker network, he developed a close friendship with another military handler, a man who would eventually become Shadow's original partner. When that handler died, arrangements were quietly made to ensure the dog would continue serving alongside someone worthy of him, someone connected to the same values, the same mission, the same promise. The connection wasn't planned perfectly. Life rarely works that way, but the mountain's protectors had kept watch, guiding, helping, preserving, until eventually Ethan and Shadow found each other. The final thread, the final connection, the final piece. By the time Ethan reached the end of the letter, tears blurred his vision. Not from sadness, not entirely, from understanding. For years he had believed himself abandoned, lost, forgotten. The truth proved something very different. He had been loved from a distance, protected from a distance, prepared for a responsibility he never knew existed. The sun slowly lowered across the valley. Golden light spilled across the mountains. Rachel eventually left. The property grew quiet, peaceful. Shadow slowly climbed onto the porch beside him. Older now, a little slower, a little grayer, but still there, still loyal, still watching over him. Ethan folded the letter carefully, then looked out across the valley. Streams shimmered below like silver ribbons. Ranches stood strong. Fields glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Life filled the land, exactly as the keepers intended. Shadow rested his head against Ethan's boot. The familiar gesture brought a smile. "You know something, partner?" The dog's ears twitched. "We made it." Shadow's tail thumped once. The mountains stood silent around them. The same mountains that once hid secrets. The same mountains that once hid pain. Now they held something else. Home. Not the house. Not the land. Not the inheritance. Home was the place where loyalty led you. The place where sacrifice meant something. The place where broken people found healing. The place where a man who had lost everything finally discovered he still had a future. As the last light disappeared behind the Rockies, Ethan sat quietly beside the dog, who had saved him more times than he could count. Below them, the valley glowed with life. Beside him, Shadow slept peacefully. And for the first time since losing Emily, Ethan felt something he thought was gone forever. Peace. The mountain had kept its promise, and at long last, Ethan Cross was finally home. If you believe doing the right thing matters more than owning power, type yes in the comments. And if you've ever had to stand your ground when nobody else would, drop a 1 below and share where you're watching from. If stories about justice, loyalty, and ordinary people refusing to give up mean something to you, subscribe and join us for the next journey across the mountains, ranches, and back roads of America.